So, Bex or Dave, do you want to kick off with what we're going to try and do today?
Yeah. So we discussed, if you remember, for those of you that were at the last meeting, that we were talking about the data that gets collected as part of Regulation 38 requirements with new developments. So what we thought we'd do for this meeting is just have a sort of, George will do a brief recap of what we talked about last meeting and also show us some progress that he's made, or not him personally, well, it was partly him personally, in looking further into Regulation 38 requirements. And then we were going to sort of segue into talking about just general golden thread of information requirements and opening the floor to people to talk about what they've done in order to address the golden thread. So that roughly covers it, doesn't it, Bex?
I believe so, yeah. And I guess today it's as just as email said, it's talking, it's a sort of like a round table discussion of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it as well.
Yeah. Perfect. So, George, did you want to sort of kick off? I'm assuming you want to share your screen or something, so.
Yes, I will. Could you just give me just a couple of minutes, because I've lost the thing I was going to show.
Okay.
It'll only take me a moment.
Yeah, no problems. I'll give the opportunity for more people to join if people are running late. So.
Yeah. I think the other question is if people could give some thought. What we'd like to do is to get from people their view on what's happening with the or how they're actually deploying things at the moment as well. So that was the other aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Broadly, I'm ready now. Sorry. It's not letting me share. Oh, it is now. God. Okay, so there are two things or two aspects that it's clear that we need to be considering. Regulation 38 is the handover information from a project, and it's not just a new build project. It can be also just a refurbishment, for example, anywhere where more than one contractor's involved. Now requires that information. And this isn't new. This has been in place for 20 years, but it's been emphasized or there's more of a focus on it now. So that's the Regulation 38 bit. But the other is Regulation 7. Paul McSolly's drew my attention to this, which is materials and workmanship. So this is beyond fire. So this is one of the aspects that needs to be considered. So given that that's required for building regs, from an operations point of view, which is the focus of this group, I believe this is also required, and we need to work out how, for example, you're collecting the required information for to satisfy Regulation 7. Sorry. But what's happened with Regulation 38 in August, which we discussed in other meetings, there was the amendment in August where basically they tightened up on the fact that, quite frankly, on most projects, in many cases, people didn't even look at or didn't really scrutinize the fact that the information had actually been handed over. Now, most of the client organisations we've been dealing with, that we've engaged in this process, they've actually got all checklists for having stuff handed over, but it still isn't necessarily being complied with by supply chains in a rigorous way. But what's now happened is that it's now a requirement for the client organisations to actually state explicitly that they've got all the information that's needed. And they must acknowledge receipt of the fire safety information and also building safety. And on the other side, the contractors have got to confirm that they've received the information, or that they've provided the information and they've got a confirmation that it's been delivered. So one of the questions that I've got at the moment is that we've discussed is how operations teams are continuing with this, because any work that you ask anybody to carry out on your buildings, you have to provide them with all that information, and you've got to then ensure that you've received back from them the completed data. And Regulation 38 is probably one of the more explicit parts of building regs, in my view, and it basically says that you need to have these things in place, and those are the things that we've extracted from Regulation 38, which we think are which are mentioned. So we think is something that should be scrutinised. And one of the things that we've been doing separately as Active Plan, we've been working with Dave and his team at Origin on a new build handover and identifying what was handed over, and then enabling Origin to see what was handed over in the O&M information. So, for example, what had gone through building control, but then starting to drill into some of the detail. So I'll show you in a moment that that's what we've been working on here. But you start to see that there's a lot of information. This is at handover last year that was missing, and what this has done, it's enabled Origin to go back to the contractor and the supply chain to get what's needed, and also recording in here the notes from building control. But this is the shocking one. This is the Regulation 38 information, and you can see that there's just an enormous amount that wasn't provided. And as I say, these are basically placeholders to be able to that Origin have been using to actually then go and collect the rest of the information. So I'll stop at that for now, but is that helpful? Martin, I know that this is something, sorry, pick on you, but I know that Balfour Beatty are quite hot on this, aren't they now? I think I imagine it would be interesting to know how you're following that through within Balfour Beatty.
Okay, I don't worry about me, George, being thrown under buses. I have had worse. How are we following that through? Firstly, we don't do a lot of residential build. In fairness, most of our operations in the build sector are non-residential. But of those that we do, we are following it through. But we do see an awful lot of lack of discipline I'm choosing my words carefully, within the supply chain and within other contractors. So it's, you know, the red slide you showed, George, whilst a shock, wasn't a shock in effect. I think a lot of it comes down to the way that the contracts are set out, or the tender inquiries are set out, in terms of, you know, we all can write an inquiry along the lines of you're going to comply with all of the building regs, aren't you? And you get the standard response back, yeah. But I think it's helpful to sort of say, and in particular, Regulation 38, we're going to need this as an inquiry, both from main principal contractors and also from customers. So yeah, interesting sort of slide, George.
Yeah,
Got me thinking.
So
we should be more specific in our requirements rather than general.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things as well, you've just said something that I think I hear a lot, that there's a perception this is about residential. But Regulation 38, my understanding is it applies to all buildings.
Any building regulations approved contract, yes.
Yeah.
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 But yeah, the slide,
Well, that's
the red
interesting.
slide. Yeah. Any building regs sector, any project needing building regulations, there's a you have to follow 38 as well. Definitely.
So which projects aren't responsible for, or do you not have to follow building regs?
Civil engineering projects, nuclear projects, different sectors.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Sorry.
But for buildings,
any building regulation project, you've got to follow the building regs, which is coming as a shock to most people in the industry at the moment.
So schools and universities and hospitals and things like that.
Building regs, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good. I suppose the clue's in the title, isn't it?
It's a strange one, yeah. People are relearning that. Yeah.
Yeah. Bex, have you got any observations about how you're doing it at Live West?
Nothing solid, I'm afraid. But I was just going to actually ask Martin. Actually, you say that it's very much what George was showing was very reflective of what you see as well. What would you see as best practice if there was a perfect world? How would you see this be driven?
I think it all comes down to procurement, Bex. You get what you buy, and if you're, like we were talking about, the general sort of requirements and the specific requirements, if you're reliant on contracts that are just general, to say that you're going to comply with the law of the land and the building regs, and you're going to get people's interpretations rather than if you're specific. Then if you're specific, you get back what you have actually specifically asked for. I think it's, yeah, I think you get what you buy. We are what we are procured to buy, the means we're procured by. It's no secret. Most people want the cheapest price. And that's what they get. They get the cheapest price. If they set out and say, I want the cheapest price, but here's a list of things that I need with it, that's a step forward, I think.
Would the cheapest price, just because of compliance with building regs, would the cheapest price not include this anyway? Or is it just the mechanism of just giving the information?
People know they can, and then past they have got away with it.
I think in part of the challenge, Bex, is that because client organisations haven't really been active in chasing it in some ways, or it's perhaps too overwhelming. I mean, some have been very good. In fact, I'm just looking at the moment. I'm just looking to get the ones that Westminster are doing, and also Origin are doing, and it's in the Origin one is very rigorous. If I can just show you that. This is Origin's checklist, and it's 30 odd pages, and it goes down to considerable detail in terms of the checklist. And we've been using this to sort of inform our thinking. What we think we need to get to is something that's more standardized, because it seems crazy that different client so that's their checklist. I think this one here is the Westminster Council one, which is a single page. Now, if contractors like Balfour Beatty they're working for lots of different clients and they're not asking for things in a consistent way, then that becomes a bit of a challenge, really. We've been doing this work to look at what's required in Regulation 38, but also what's required in BS 9999, which is the operational stage. So this is building Regulation 38 is for new project handover, and 9999 is for the work in use, as it were. So what's required and what isn't, and all the rest of it. But then what we've also looked at is what's under BISRIA's statutory compliance recommendations, and how services should be described, so that there's a standardized way of viewing that, and what certificates are needed. So I think it's helpful if we could, as a working group, actually come together with something that is clearer, so that can be issued to contractors like Martin, and also tie it back to the regulations. So these are the regulations themselves, so that we've got something that makes it easier for principal designers and principal contractors to check that everything is compliant. Any observations on that? Lee, could I just ask?
Hello. So I think my role where I've come today is as a kind of with a keen interest and an observer in this, and what I've just seen you demonstrate there, I was going to just type into chat. Have you ever considered putting a large language model over the top of it to make a bit more sense of that information, and be able to share it out amongst people a lot more easily than having it kind of in a spreadsheet like that?
It's a good suggestion. Yeah, I mean, it is something that we're considering. The fundamental thing is actually getting the source data together to go into a large language model.
Yeah.
Does anybody? I'm going to hand back over to Bex and Dave in a second, but is there anybody else? Alex, have you got anything to contribute on this? Alex Norman, rather.
Sorry. Hello. Yeah. Well, predominantly we manage residential buildings, so ultimately we manage when it's finished rather than within the building, and we're not involved in the build side of it. So we get a completed development, as it were. So the handover information that we get is nigh on impossible to get hold of, and what we actually receive is garbage half of the time, to be honest. So most of our developments are now 20 plus years old, and we're finding it extremely difficult to obtain any of the plans. And every one of the developers that have gone into administration, it's now becoming quite difficult to explain to people why they've now got to pay for these new plans and bits and pieces. And yeah, it's a bit of a difficult situation at the moment, to be honest. But no, I don't have any comments on what's already been. But yeah, I'm looking at those spreadsheets thinking this is exactly what we're looking at with 99.9% of our portfolio. Everything's missing. There's nothing there, nothing available.
Definitely needs an aligned approach. I think see exactly the same with some of ours, and embarrassingly had to send surveyors out to new builds recently to understand what was actually inside them. And that golden thread of information that comes through all of the REBA stages just kind of gets lost when it comes to the operational management. So I'd say I'm a huge advocate for kind of pushing how we can bring data through from the development pipeline into the in-use and the life cycle of the building itself.
Yeah. Well, most of the questions that are being asked at the moment, because ultimately we use the funds that the residents pay into a fund, into a pot, and it's all their money, and they've bought these properties in good faith, and most of them have bought from the original developers, or you know, other leaseholders that have sold them on in the meantime. But most of them are asking, why on earth have the council not got a register of all of this information? So surely there should be somewhere on file where the fire strategies have been registered. You know, somebody has gone through a process at some point in time to understand this is what building we have. This should be the strategy. This is how it's been built. All the considerations right from the outset. Surely all of this has already been considered. Where is this information? And we're not able to answer it.
I think that's why the regulator is advocating for professional qualifications now, because maybe some of that has been lost between our disassociation from the council and councils and where we are today.
Yeah, it's just it's so difficult to explain to people why they've now got to pay for all this, and it's not cheap. It's just yeah, it's a good industry certainly to be in at the moment, isn't it?
I think the thing is, Alex, that it's always somebody else's responsibility.
Yeah.
And people have been passing the parcel around for a long time, and often the responsibility is passed down to the person that's least able to actually address it.
Yeah.
And one of the encouraging things for me is that, because I've been on this journey for what's now called the golden thread for about 40 years, and you know, part of it is that there's always been a desire by the more progressive people in the industry to try and make the improvements that are needed, but it's not been coordinated, and there's never really been a driver other than let's do things better, you know, for the common good sort of thing.
Yeah.
So what I think the Fire Safety Act and the Building Safety Act has done, it's actually underpinned a lot of the things that, as I say, the more progressive people have been trying to do for a long time.
Yeah.
And now
plug the gaps.
it's a statutory thing. And of course, everybody's now saying, well, hang on a minute, you're asking us to do things that are unreasonable. But, you know, actually, these things, you've in fact, the Regulation 38 stuff has been statutory for 20 years. You know,
nobody follows it.
Yeah, well, there's two aspects, exactly. There's two aspects to it. One is people aren't following it, and also people aren't policing it. And you know, the other aspect of that is that there's, from a strict point of view, the way I understand, I have to say I'm no expert in any of this. I've just listened to people that are, and you know, all too often when we were going through the golden thread asset information stuff that we've all been, well, a lot of us have been working on for the last 3 or 4 years or 3 years, people have said, well, it must have been provided because it's gone through building control. Yeah, all of that will be in the regulation 38 pack. Yeah, and it's only when we've started to really drill into it that we've realized how bad it is.
Yeah.
And I think that is, you know, it's certainly the responsibility of the supply chains to have provided it. You know, that's part of complying with building regs. But I have to say that it's also down to the clients to not just confirm that, or not just check and chase for it and demand it, but it's also to keep it up to date. Because you know, okay, it's no longer regulation 38 after the project's finished, but the data's the same.
Yeah.
You still need to be maintaining the information about fire compartmentation and you know where the fire dampers are. I mean, most companies or most organizations I come across, the asset management teams, they've no idea where the fire dampers are.
No.
Yeah, and it sounds incredible, but it's not easy for them to find it out unless it was actually recorded when at the installation period. It's very difficult to get all the information about fire dampers in an existing building.
Yeah.
And cavity barriers, you know, you don't stand a chance, do you?
This is one of the big things: cavity barriers, fire strategies. You know, and residents are arguing with us to say why are we going to spend nearly 20 grand on looking at fire evacuation plans and fire strategies when that should have been the fundamental starting point for the building regulations to actually to tick all the boxes and actually allow occupation in this residential building. Surely all of this is already in place and we cannot find it. You know, we've got files from floor to ceiling of plans and everything else, but they're all on a plan, and that some of them say as built, some of them don't, but we know for a fact that the ones that do say as built are actually incorrect. So how does I mean it's just a whirlwind.
Rather than looking at this from a point of view of the glass half empty, which I think, you know, is natural for us to feel that, especially the more you dig into these things, you realize how much is missing. I think we need to look at what can we do about it.
Yeah.
Because the government can't do anything about it. That's not what they're there for. You know, they can impose and they can put legislation in place, but they can't actually fix the problem of getting the information together, I don't think.
No.
I think all they can do is create the environment so that the industry can do it, to be honest.
Yeah. At the residents' cost, unfortunately. Which is the wrong. It is what it is, and we have to follow the procedures now. But ultimately, the residents are unhappy that they're having to pay when so many releases by Michael Gove suggesting that they're not going to pay for any fire improvements. Well, this in reality is creating brand new documentation that should they be funding? It's a question on the table. That's that they don't believe that they should be. Now they're the responsible parties in a lot of these residential buildings. They're voluntary directors, and they're now the PAP, and they're responsible to put all of these documents that don't exist into place for the first time. It's all right maintaining it. It's just obtaining it for the first time.
Absolutely. So our role, I see, as BIM4Housing is trying to look at simplifying things and standardizing them, because there are things that we can do to make that job easier, rather than it being reinvented on every single project. We've got ways of standardizing that so that work can be done once and then applied many times. So you know, that's, you know, for example, one of the things that we've done recently is we've had a team of over 100 people working on standardizing fire door inspections. Now, you know, why is that necessary? Well, the amount of money that's being spent on fire door inspections is significant, and there's fire doors that are being they're being condemned and having to be replaced when actually there's no practical reason why they should be. Conversely, there's ones that, you know, haven't been replaced that probably should be. So we've produced guidance that can standardize all of that, and that's going to make, I think it's going to make it a lot easier.
Definitely.
Okay, I'll
Thank you.
shut up now.
Sorry.
Oh,
So will I.
no, not at all. No, that was really helpful. Dave, do you want to sorry. Sorry, somebody messaged me and it threw me just for a second there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you know, this highlights, and interestingly, we are looking at how we do this at the moment, is part of the reason I think why this stuff gets overlooked, and all of a sudden you find years later that stuff's been missing, is that no one really resourced that checking. And you know, ourselves, we've you know, we've been pushing for I don't know, over a year, saying, look, we need a specific resource whose job it is to check that all this information has been delivered and it's correct, because often this gets left to the project manager, who hasn't got time because they're already busy doing other stuff. Or, you know, the fire surveyor will go and he'll start looking at, you know, the sections that he's interested in. The compliance people tend to think that they just want everything handed over on the plate, and they don't want to do anything, you know, when it comes to, you know, the new builds or the refurbs. They're thinking, no, that's the development team's job. And
Yeah.
so stuff starts falling through the gaps. And I think unless that sort of is recognised as a role in an organisation to do that checking, it's the same situation will persist in a lot of these organisations. And the thing is that you do, you know, for that role, you need some sort of technical knowledge in order to know what you're looking at, in order to see if anything's missing. And the problem with that, obviously, is trying to find someone that's got that knowledge, but at the same time is quite happy to go and do, you know, essentially grunt work, you know, chasing down documentation and certificates and data, when they, you know, they've got the technical knowledge to perhaps, you know, go into, you know, project management or something like that, which obviously pays a lot better than someone going around looking for information. So it is, you know, I think that's the thing that I think people have got to recognise, that there's a role there that needs to be resourced, you know, or even a team that needs to resource it, depending on how much data and documents you're dealing with, and then putting that in place. Otherwise, you know, everyone will do exactly what they've done for years, talk about it, but never actually have anyone available to spend the time checking to make sure that information's, you know, correct and in place. So
Absolutely.
yeah. Which sort
Caroline, sorry, go on.
Go on, no, go on.
I was just going to say, Caroline, you're from Sodexo. So what's your experience been of this?
Well, from a Sodexo point of view, we're quite a little bit further down the line on this kind of thing. So I was a little bit like Martin, we're more of a commercial things, but yeah, very, very similar. So the slide that we saw very beginning, where we saw lots and lots of reds, while shocking, it's not surprising. We find it very difficult when we take on a new contract to be able to get that information, so we can start afresh from a new contract point of view to make sure that we have everything we should have. So when we're maintaining things going forward, we have a really good library of certification and understanding of where things are. Because I think whilst it's the thing is, we've got to think of worst case scenarios, haven't we, sometimes, to make sure that if something goes wrong, we can prove everything we did was right, to make sure that accidents do happen. But you have to make sure you maintain everything in the right way when you should have done. You know where everything is. So that's kind of some of it. But yeah, the maintaining of the data is probably the most difficult thing. So an example for me personally is I was involved in a contract probably about 10, 12 years ago, and we lost that contract to another supplier. And I know that the data that we handed off to them was as good as it could be. We'd done surveys, we had all the information, we knew the life cycle, and we handed that back to the client to give to their new supplier. A year or so ago, we won that contract back, and the data difference between what I know we sent to them and what we've received back is worlds apart. We had full details of make, model, location, everything. So we could have a full details of, let's say, a boiler, and now we just have, yeah, there's a boiler down there, and that's it. So we've gone from a really full data set to a really, really basic data set. And I think that goes back to a comment about you get what you pay for. So people just didn't have the resource to maintain that to the same level. And it just got, over the last 10 years, it's just got diluted and diluted and diluted. So you don't actually know what is anywhere. And I've seen the data, and I know what I sent them, and what we've got back now is just ridiculous.
I think the thing is that it's a digital asset, isn't it? There's a physical asset,
Yeah,
which obviously is relatively straightforward for people to look at and say, well, yeah, you've not that the condition of that is poor,
mhm.
but you can see it physically. But I don't think we've yet got to the situation where we're adequately considering the digital asset. And actually, the digital asset, I think, increasingly is going to be more important than the physical asset, because that's where the evidence is that you've done it properly. I mean, in
Yeah.
financial services, if you don't have the digital transactions, the digital records, then you've got real problems, haven't you?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, you have some contracts where you've got engineering teams that actually sat on site, so they know it a lot more intimately than if we have a contract where we've got properties all over a district or indeed all over the country. So yeah, from an asset management point of view, you do literally just see the lines and lines of data. But yeah, it's been able to make that good enough that somebody can go onto site and find those assets and make sure that things are there. But yeah, I think it does date back to the clients. I don't think clients have a full understanding of what they should have and what they should be demanding right at the very beginning, in order for it to move to the next stage of a project. So right at the very beginning, we should have A to Z of all this information, and then it moves on to your maintenance teams, and they shouldn't, it's almost like a handover, the O&M manuals for individual assets. You don't want to be taking something on if you don't have all the information to make sure you're maintaining it to keep the warranty of the asset, you're maintaining it to keep it safe within manufacturer's recommendations. And I think it's same for a much larger thing in terms of taking on a building. We shouldn't be taking it on until we've got everything to make sure we can maintain it safely, for whether it's office residents or people that live there, whoever those residents are, and whatever the building's used for. It's clients understanding, yes, you can go for the cheapest option, but the cheapest option doesn't necessarily mean maintaining that data. And I know it's, you know, it seems very airy-fairy perhaps for some clients, but it's critical.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have any observations on that?
There's one thing I was going to mention, which is very early days for us at the moment, is we are looking at using Microsoft Copilot, so AI basically, to when we get the digital data and the digital certificates, particularly for compliance related tasks. So, you know, where we've got, you know, a certificate to, you know, for a fire door, for argument's sake, that we'll be able to just dump those into the system for then Copilot to go and interrogate the information on the actual document, be it a PDF or whatever, and then pull out the relevant information like installation dates and you know, servicing dates and things like that, and which company serviced it. So it's going to be an interesting pilot this when we start using it, just to see how accurate it ends up being. But it will definitely, if it works, it will definitely be a big time saver. But we'll have to see what, you know, what the rate of success is. Let's put it this way, in it learning, you know, how to interrogate these documents and pull out the right data, and not the wrong data. So,
who's doing that, Dave? Within your
group? Guys, yeah. So we basically have been we've built an asset management system in Dynamics. And yeah, I see. Yeah, same. That's one of the ones we're thinking of doing, Lee, is for the start. But yeah, so we're building an asset management system in Dynamics, which has been a very, very slow burning project. But they're basically looking to get all of the compliance components into the system around September this year. With a view that then once they've got all of that built into the system, they'll then start trialing Copilot to see if they can then pick up the information that the contractors are sending us and dealing with it in an automatic way, rather than, you know, having to use an actual person to go and check all the information. So that's our Dynamics team that are doing that at the moment. So.
Is anybody else using any AI?
Not so much AI, but we have something a little similar. It's called Promonidocs. So essentially what that does is when documents are uploaded against either an asset or a planned maintenance task, it will check the PDF in the same sort of way, and it'll check for sort of certain parameters. So if it's a gas boiler, it will check and make sure that the certificate is signed where it should be, that the engineers put in their gas safe number, and it's dated and everything it should be. So it just reduces the amount of physical auditing we need to do from a desktop point of view. So it kind of spits out the things that where there's question marks on that kind of data. So we can go in and then look and go, right, you've not actually signed this document. Your engineer needs to sign it because it's not actually a valid document because he's not signed it. And things like that. So it's very, very similar. But it's looking for certain parameters to make sure that the documents that we upload against either the site or the planned maintenance is valid in terms of that. And when you're dealing with, you know, if you've got a contract with 1,600 sites, you know, you're not going to be able to look at every single gas boiler inspection to make sure it's as it should be. But this way it can be done automatically, and it would just spit you out the ones that have question marks where it doesn't look quite right.
That's really interesting, and the whole AI approach is obviously a very new technology. It'd be really interesting to hear, you know, further on down the projects if they involve AI and things like that. the level of risk appetite from the organization in terms of it as well, because obviously it's an unknown, and I can just imagine, you know, putting the business case forward and just seeing how that's received in terms of risk, and also obviously in terms of output. I think it's a great use of tools for something that can be easily machine led.
Mm.
Well, one of the things that anybody that's been involved in what we've been doing, this is basically what I've been promoting for years has been making sure that things are machine readable. And you'll see here that PDFs aren't really what I would call machine readable, because at the moment, even with AI, you need to in some way train it to find things. So, for example, just giving you some examples of data sheets. If, for example, you want to know what the fire rating was the fire rating provided with the product. Here I've got one example of a data sheet where fire rating is visibly there, but the only way that's not machine readable. See that's, you've just got that as a, and then on the next one, you've got another way of describing fire rating. So that's completely different than that one. And then this one here is another one. So I do think that there's a lot that we can do with machine learning and with AI, but we need to recognize that some of that is we are actually going to need some machine readable information. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Did you see the comment that Lee's put in the chat, George?
No. Yeah, definitely. That would be great. If we can take the PDFs, I do agree that those slides that I showed you there are probably 2 or 3 years old, and obviously there's a huge amount, particularly with the latest ChatGPT, is going to make a big difference. Is already making a big difference. And you know, to some extent, that's where our little community could help with that, because we could actually be trying some of these things out. You know, the machine learning, Lee, with that, is there a way of that machine learning being shared?
Yeah, so there's been quite a few changes. I won't bore everybody with the ChatGPT backend, but there's been some huge strides made over the past couple of weeks that allow you to update PDFs directly into the vector database and allow you to learn from it. When you start them off, sometimes they're a bit daft, but you can put your own expert knowledge to it to train it even better. And obviously, it's an iterative process, and I've been getting some really fantastic results out of it. You know, if you want to just have a chat with somebody to kind of check your thinking or check if this is within the realms of possibility, then it's a really great tool to kind of get you off a blank page, I suppose.
So who's doing that within your organization? Where are you from, Lee?
I'm Holton Housing, but I'm kind of doing this as an aside to my role. I mean, my role's head of innovation and architecture. So I've been looking to the future for the past couple of years, really, to understand how we can manage our asset data better. And as I put in that post earlier in the Teams chat, we got a fair amount of technical depth in the first digital transformation, which is it makes it difficult to move things forward. But I'm in a position now where I've been asked to review our asset data down to the data architecture, which has given me a really good way in to understand. And that's why I've been a lurker in this group, I suppose, George, for a number of years, because I've had a vested interest in all the systems that pull together how housing is actually delivered to people. And I feel that some of the changes in technology and some of the updates in these AIs now really give us an opportunity to do things differently and kind of maybe overcome some of these issues that we haven't got the resource to do, the physical hours to do. We can take that away from people and give them the information to make the decisions more readily without having to do some of that work. And obviously, you need to do your due diligence on the outputs of it, because it's not going to be 100% correct all the time. And I would never give it to anybody who didn't have any of that kind of base knowledge. But in terms of, people who are sat here today who are experts and could possibly, question what comes out of it and understand what it's getting at, I think it's really useful for us in those respects.
Tell me, with ChatGPT, there's obviously the free one, but then there's the one that is the updated version, which I think is $20 a month or something like that. But when, for example, you do use it to do your own suggestions and the training, because this is what it's really all about, isn't it? Is being able to train the model.
Yeah.
Would the suggestions that you make or the choices that you make, would they get fed back into the main ChatGPT?
You can have it so they go directly back into it. You can have it go into an inference model as well, which then allows yourself or me to look at what people have actually asked and to see what some of the results are. And you can almost go through and rag rate them yourself to say which is better. And that's how you kind of have that human aspect into the training over time. It's all very new, but it's very, very exciting, the possibilities of it.
Well, what I'm thinking is that that's something that we could really use to great effect within our community, isn't it? If we've got people that are experimenting with it, like Dave's using Copilot, but whatever. If we're also we've been experimenting as Active Plan. We've been experimenting with AI for about 8 years. So we've been building that type of trying things out and learning from them. And as you say, the large language models rather. That what I'm thinking is, if people aren't all experimenting with it and actually using it, if we could encourage people to enable what they're learning to share, then that could help the community, couldn't it?
Yeah, it's almost like a democratization of data, isn't it? So, if you guys have been gathering 10 years worth of information and it's locked in a silo behind your business, how could you democratize that for the greater good of the sector? I mean, you've got to think about it, I suppose, put framework around it. At its simplest level, that's what you can get from it. But you might want to, for purposes of data sharing and all that sort of stuff, I think we need to think about governance around it as well.
Yeah. The interesting thing, Lee, is in actual fact, George that you see on the screen there is an avatar. He doesn't actually exist. He's being, the words are actually being spoken by AI, and then they've transferred that to his face to make it look like he's doing the actual speaking.
But Dave, that's not too far from the truth.
No.
I saw some scary stuff from Microsoft the other day, whereby you can put that information into somebody who's just talking. And I don't know if you can see when I turn my camera off, it looks like I'm a Viking there, but that's not actually me. That's an AI generated image of me as a Viking.
Yeah, I think if we were doing that, Dave, if I had something to do with it, I'd change it significantly in terms of yeah. But yeah, so that's an interesting thing. What we tend to do, Lee, and if you've been to the a lot of the some of the other meetings, you'll know the working group meetings happen every 2 months, right? But what we do from those working group meetings, we pick up on ideas and things that people want to explore, and we have specific work streams, and the work streams take on a particular topic. Now, this to me seems an obvious one that we ought to have a bit of a work stream on, because it also cuts across the other working groups. So is that something that you'd be willing to help with?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to get more involved in pushing this across the sector. I think it really would benefit us.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, let's do that then.
Yeah, cool.
On that point, there's work that we've been doing. We've had a work stream underway for about a year now that a number of you have been involved with, but some of you may not have been. So it's worth me just showing that. What we did about a year ago is sorry, for some reason that wasn't working. What we did, we looked at what the impact was. This is probably last April. Of what we need to address that is causing a problem as far as the golden thread's concerned. And these were 4 topics that we drew from quite a few that people suggested. This was one. How do we prevent the wrong product being installed? How do we deal with the fact that often building services is done after the rest of the construction has already started, which has a massive impact on compartmentation? This one specifically on asset information. How do we make sure that the information that was started with then gets carried on during the asset lifetime, so we don't have situations where, as Caroline was saying earlier, the information then, because it's not been maintained properly, you end up with very poor quality information at the end, and you're probably spending more money on inspections than you need to. And then the last one is, how do we ensure that building safety data is kept up to date? And I think certainly the last 2 are very relevant as far as operations are concerned. So we've been running workshops. The first of these was last May at Excel, where we had in-person sessions trying to address these particular topics. And we've done that, and in fact we've got another one coming up in Digital Construction Week in June, again looking at different aspects of things. But this is something that you may be aware of, but if you're not, I think it's worth us sharing. Just trying to find the publication. Yeah, so we've currently got 4 publications. We've had about 150 people engaged in each of these topics, which I think is a fantastic feedback from the industry. And what we're now doing is producing that as this is a draft version of the document that we've produced. So it goes through what the feedback was, the recommendations of the teams to say how we should be dealing with things. So Richard is trying to frantically put together all of the information that has been updating on this. I don't know, Richard, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm just incognito.
Okay. Could you?
Yeah, no, we've got the document George has just shown is was the first, after the first meeting. We've had 2 more plus extra input, so it's going to be something like 4 or 5 times longer than that. The last meeting was a couple of weeks ago, so I'm busy collating and writing for the 4 of them, but it's going to take a little bit of time. as you can imagine.
You've been using some AI on some of the stuff as well, haven't you, Richard?
Yeah, we did. Some of it we have. Some of it's been very successful. Some of it not so successful. We get high point, as most of you know, we get high point notes written up after each meeting. Any of our meetings, this meeting will have the same, which we put on the website and send out to attendees and those who said they were coming but weren't able to make it. We applied AI to put the high point notes for the meetings on the 4 questions into bullet points to make it more manageable in terms of chopping it out or spotting duplications, and that's helped a lot. It's far from perfect, obviously, but it's helped a lot. We tried something similar actually with the meeting recording script, which is what our writer uses when she's doing the high points. But it's the voice picking up and converting to text is not that great, and we found that it just didn't work. So it has to go through the human stage, if you like, of her writing out properly, before we can actually apply the AI for it to be of any value. But at that point, it has saved a lot of time.
I'm thinking, Richard, that if Lee, as Lee's saying there might be some new stuff that's coming through. We could
absolutely. The thing is, it's coming out so quickly. We try and keep vaguely abreast of it. I say we do it. I'm not doing it. It just does it. Trust me, I wouldn't know where to start. I just tell him what I need. But he keeps abreast to some extent, but it's just impossible. It's a full-time job, just assessing which platform to use, which application to use. And obviously we just don't have the time to do that. But so I think if we could, as you said, have a work stream on this, it would be really, really valuable, because then we've got maybe 10 or 15 people who are bringing their new learning all together and saying, this works, this doesn't work, don't waste your time worrying with looking at that one, this one's amazing, but not for this. I think it would be very, very valuable, because we've got we're having so many meetings now, and we've got so many publications in the pipeline, that anything that gives us any help with that will be much appreciated, especially, as George said, with BIM and AM coming online. Well, the first meeting on the 20th of May. That's going to be, I won't say we'll be doubling the number of meetings, but probably not far off. To make the outputs manageable, any help we can get in any direction is absolutely invaluable.
Cool. Right. So, is there anything else that that people are interested in covering today? Because this is really the
Oh, George, sorry, can I interrupt you?
Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about the AI group. Would your Tim come on that? Because he's very knowledgeable.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
that would be excellent. He's a very knowledgeable chap on this stuff. Sorry, it was just a thought.
The difficulty will be with Tim is getting him shut up. No, he's very.
I'm quite good at that, George.
Yeah, yeah, he's very enthusiastic, but it'll be a matter of making sure that it's yeah. I think it's a really good call there. Yeah, good. Alex, who do you work for? Sorry, Alex Norman.
Scanlan's Property Management.
What's that called? Sorry.
Scanlan's Property Management. We've got
Scanlan's.
Yeah. We're a firm of chartered surveyors as well as property management, but predominantly we do property management these days because surveying kind of went quiet during lockdown and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, be interesting. I don't know if that's, does this AI stuff interest you?
It does, and I think that I think quite a lot of people are more frightened of it than are going to welcome it. But I actually think that the amount of human input that it's going to need to get to the position of actually putting people out of jobs we're years and years away. But I think that some of the stuff when you go into Microsoft itself and you can type in a question, it comes back with some of the information, and it's really quite detailed. It's quite impressive, really. It could put a lot of typists out of business, that's for sure. But yeah, we've not started using it on any of documentation we're recording in any way, shape or form. We're not there yet.
Yes. Yeah, I think one of the big challenges that we've all got at the moment is that the way the industry has worked on the basis of risk transfer, and that's no longer really a defense.
No.
You've got to be able to manage risk, and you've got to, if you're passing the risk on to somebody else, you're still responsible for it.
Of course, yeah.
And you've got to check that the person that you've passed it on to is competent in being able to deliver it. So it's I think it's a very interesting situation where, as you say, the more help we can get to make sense of all the variables, it is going to be really important.
Yeah. But it still needs human input, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of being able to pull this together, so the Regulation 38 stuff, I think we're we're agreed that there's work to be done to get a higher degree of standardization. Would you agree with that, everybody?
Yeah, without doubt. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So therefore, that it may be worth us having a work stream that's just looking at that, because thinking it through, the operations group needs that information to be able to continue to maintain it. So I suppose the question is then, how is that being done at the moment, and how is that recognized within your organizations as being important? I'm sure it is.
Yeah, I think, funnily enough, this is one of the issues with standardization, in that there's organizations themselves tend to call a spade a shovel, or vice versa, and then their IT systems, be it a compliance system or an asset management system or a housing system, invariably that spade is called a shovel, or a spade. It could be a shovel in one system, a spade in the other system, and a fork in the other system. And the problem you've got there is, coming back to risk, I guess, is the appetite for people to go, right, we're going to go take this standardization, go through all of our systems and change everything there, to say, all right, we're going to change all of this data that we've had for years in this system we've had for years, and now use this new definitive data dictionary. Because people don't really have the luxury of saying, well, let's start from scratch, let's build a new system based on this standardization. So I think where it will be a good thing to have a standardized data dictionary, if you like, of terms, because obviously we see that coming from Regulation 38 anyway, from the work that we've done there, is then offer that out to people with a view that they then have to do their own translation tables, basically, to say, well, in this data dictionary it's called this, but in this data dictionary it's called something else. because, you know, and then building those translations per organisation rather than you being able to dictate a standardised list and expect them to go and ditch all of their systems and, you know, even their way of working, basically, just to accommodate a new standard. So.
Yes, and I think the data dictionary is a way of doing it, in that if the data dictionary can have synonyms and and the ability to do those translations, I think that's a way that can be done. And you could even use AI to support that as well.
Funnily enough, that was what I was thinking as well. Is that you know, that would be a good use of AI, really, to be able to sort of say, well, according to this document, it's, you know, it's called a fire alarm, but you know, over in the system, it's just called, you know, alarm. So, you know, it's how you then do, you know, teach it to do that translation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing, exactly, the other thing is that by looking at AI, by including AI in that, you'd be able to look at more of the context of the word that's being used, which can then vary which alternative you use. But that's serious software engineering stuff, you know, so we need to think about that. The core thing, I mean, Lee's just put in the I agree with what you're saying, Lee, in the chat. The only thing I would say about graph databases, though, is that because we've looked at those as well, and we've used some graph database structures on certain things, but actually using it, the in academia, it's used quite extensively, but that's partially because of the way the licensing cost works. Whereas graph databases for use for commercial use, they can be very expensive. In my experience, I mean, I don't know enough detail about it, but I think that's something that needs to be a consideration as to how that would be covered.
Yeah, I think you're right, George, and all this stuff, it does just need to have a conversation to let people know what some of the advantages of it are, because unless people know, then you know, they're going to carry on the same, aren't they, as they always have. And I really do think there's some advantages in these new disciplines, I suppose, that have come out over the past couple of years, which allow people to understand the business, how, you know, how certain elements interact with each other. Because one of my bugbears of the last couple of years is the fact that everything's kind of done slightly in silos. So they're not seeing how, you know, changing a kitchen in a property, they could actually be in there doing something else at the same time in terms of retrofit work and net zero. So they're almost like double tripling up on some of this stuff because they haven't got the data available to them at the time, or it's too complicated to be able to mix and match a number of different you know, a number of different jobs that are going on at the same time. And maybe we do need to think about our data differently. But what I've found is that no one seems to move in social housing unless it's mandated by the regulator. And the regulator's only put in at the moment that people should be using, like, you know, central knowledge information management. They haven't mandated what that is. And I go back a couple of years again to when HAC did their data standards. I still don't know anybody who's actually implemented them. I know people who use them as best practice. But I think, as Dave was saying, you can't strip back your asset management system that's working on a day-to-day basis. You know, it's kind of helping you with that demand. You can't strip it back just on a whim, can you? It's got to be part of a more business-wide transformation. And I think helping people understand, you know, from CEO down to maintenance technician, you know, not only what we're doing, but why we're doing it and how it impacts all those different levels is really important for us just to work better together, to work more kind of, you know, in a systematic kind of way, rather than doing everything individualized, you know, providing welfare support when we need to, providing building fabric support, providing demand, you know, repeat demand over here. if you add all that information together, it paints a better picture than just being able to just whacking a mold, you know, left, right, and centre. And I must say, I've said advocate a couple of times today, but I'm a huge advocate for like data making social landlords' lives easier, allowing us to do essentially more with less, because we are doing more with less, aren't we? We've not been allowed to put rents up, we can't put service charges up. Our commercial contracts are costing us more because of inflation, but we're kind of stuck in the middle with having to do a lot more with a lot less. So we need to be much more clever with some of these technologies and some of our base systems to allow us to do that in the future. Otherwise, I think some of the smaller housing associations will just get kind of steamrolled up into the larger housing associations that have got those, you know, got the numbers, got the economies of scale, I suppose, on the supply side.
Yeah, that was me last week. because we're now officially part of Places for People. So yeah, so Origin is going to be the London regional office, basically.
Yeah, but it's happening all around, isn't it? And then
yeah.
From a personal level, I know I think that social landlords should be quite local to the stock, but that's another conversation entirely.
Yeah, and well, I mean, funny enough, that's part of the reason why the merger happened, is because I think they'd sold all of their stock in London, basically, and then so didn't have anything in London. And then when the possibility of merging came up, they thought, oh well, we can have stuff in London, but we've now got all the staff in place, whereas they didn't before, because most of their people were in Scotland and Manchester. So yeah, so they're so it will be good from our perspective that we'll have more resources that we can throw at specific things. But it will be interesting because of, as I said, this work that we're already doing with asset management in Dynamics and looking at Copilot and AI and all that sort of thing. And also the thing that we've found that Power BI and Power Apps have been really, really useful to us, because we've been able to pull data out of different systems and cube it and pull all of the stuff out, particularly for compliance, in order for them to have a really good picture of what stuff has been done, hasn't been done, that they didn't have before, because the systems that we're using had really basic sort of reports. It wasn't intelligent. It wasn't flagging up warning signs when stuff hadn't been done. So there's a lot of really good work going on. But like you said, with the hack stuff, so the people that have been building the data dictionary for the asset management system had already discussed with various teams, what do you deal with, these are the compliance components that we deal with, and using the language that they referred to them by. And I actually sent the hack standards over to them and just said, you need to double check to make sure we're not building something out of nothing that no one else, doesn't match what everyone else is doing. But they were, they sort of were quite dismissive of it, because they were going, well, no, we've asked the stakeholders and that's what they want to call it. So, which is always a bit of a worry from my perspective. But
that's why I wanted to, from way back, to use BIM, even though we haven't got any particularly complex buildings. There's a lot of residential. I saw BIM as a framework that had been ratified by ISO and all that. So and all the builders and developers know it because they have to. They have to deliver it on government-backed projects. So why would they not push that into social housing as well? It seems like a no-brainer, but I think we're not set up to receive that type of information, are we? So I don't, but the developer will hand over like a 600-page PDF document and they'll leave an Arch file at the end, and it'll be like, well, if you want information, then go and look in that book there. And that's not how I want it to be in future, because you're imprisoning that data in the PDF. I want that data to move out. Yes,
Lee, you're going to get me on my hobby horse now.
And we have only got 7 minutes left.
Yeah, it's a BIM is about information. It's not about 3D modeling. Yeah, so the you can comply with the BIM protocols, ISO 19650, all the different variants of that, BS 8536, and 6644. The it's about the information, yeah, and the exchange mechanism for that is COBie. And as a result of that, because it's structured data, it can go into anything. Yeah, so it doesn't, you don't have to be able to consume a 3D model to get the benefits of BIM. And I absolutely agree with you. We should be using the BIM protocols. So Uniclass and the like, to be able to make sure that data is exchanged properly.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's the thing where you then have to look at how you then translate that data in that format into what sits in your back office systems. So.
Correct, but at least you've got a standardized way of the industry delivering it. Yeah, I mean, every client organization seems to set up their, even something like Keystone, differently. But you know, that's understandable, because they're, you know, often it's been historic. But I think that the key thing is to make sure that the information that's being delivered and also sent out to people is in a standardized format. I know Bex has done a lot of work on that, haven't you?
Yeah. So I'm just conscious of the time. It's 12:25. Is there any, just going around the table, is there any comments that you wanted to make that you haven't had a chance to say at all? Lee? No? Alex? All gone quiet. Bex, is there anything you wanted to say at all?
No, it's just been a really interesting talk about something that's quite new and quite exciting. And I was just thinking earlier about, does housing asset management software even talk to AI? You know, I was just thinking, okay, well, can we actually get that? Because there's so many cross-functional things that feed into, you know, Keystone or whatever you use as your asset management. And it's just interesting to see the capabilities of AI within that, or whether actually it only works with, you know, Microsoft OneDrive, you know, the online SaaS stuff. So I guess there's just sort of things to go away and think about, and how we can use it to make sure it's accounting for everything. Because even if you just get a slice, you're still missing the rest of the pie.
Sorry, George, you can probably give us a steer on what Bex is saying about like the asset management system feeding into AI. Is your Tim doing something like that now? Is he using it for that?
Yes, he is. Yeah.
So it's doable.
In particular, being able to use it for help desk, to be able to prompt answers and, you know, questions and things like that. So he's certainly been working with that. Yeah.
Okay.
So we could you know, give an example of that. But the key thing with that is it's the user engagement and the different types of roles. You know, part of the thing is, as Dave was saying earlier, you know, the architects, the data architects that are putting together their new system, they will say, oh, we'll talk to the stakeholders. And there's lots of different stakeholders in any housing association, and they all want very different information. Yeah.
And for very different reasons.
Yeah. Or the same information, but being presented in a different way. Yeah. And often, certainly in my experience, you find that the people that are most vocal are the ones that drive it, whereas that may not be the best for the community.
It'd be quite interesting to actually see. Is that demonstrable, George? You could show something or something.
Yeah,
see it actually in action, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. We can show that. And also, I think we could ask Alex Oldman, who's just dropped off from Civica, I imagine that they're experimenting with things as well. So I think it would be good to get a few people involved in that.
To actually see it. So this is what's happening already. Because if you don't know, you don't know, do you? So
Risk Base as well, who do a lot of inspections and things like that. I think they're also experimenting with it as well. But I can ask them.
it'd be good to have a meeting on that, wouldn't it? Where we would just to actually see not just what's coming, but what's actually there already that nobody knows about.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that there is a difference between the use of AI and the use of intelligent character recognition, which of course ICR has been around for years, but it is very much it's not intelligent per se. You can basically set it up with a template and say, right, this bit of this invoice template, that's going to have that number, and therefore just look in this area of the document so you can find VAT, and then you know that the 15 numbers after it are the VAT number, etc. So it was very limited training, and then the success rate with ICR was normally around 90% if you're lucky, and it didn't recognise handwriting, which was always a problem. I mean, I put in a big ICR system for everybody's favourite, the TV Licensing Authority, because obviously they were getting all of the TV licence documents coming through and being able to sort of read those and drop those into the database so that they could tell who'd paid the licence and who hadn't. But once again, it was intelligent, but intelligent in a very loose way.
Well, we had something the other week. Sharon McClure, who many of you know, sent
I need
her.
to drop off, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Sorry, Bex.
Yeah, because it is 12:30, isn't it? All right, Bex. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers. Sharon McClure sent her notes on the 4 questions, handwritten as photographs. Yeah, but Jis got her handwritten notes converted into text.
That is pretty good going now.
Yeah, very. I don't even know how he did it.
He's obviously not a doctor.
He did that, so because otherwise it was just like, what am I going to do with this? So yeah, very, very good.
Yeah, I can't remember what the company's called, but there's a company I've been talking to that does they do compliance checking of gas certificates and things like that.
Probably, George, is it?
It actually it isn't true compliance, but I do know true compliance, but it's TCW or something like that.
Yeah, it's Ryan at TCW's doing it. To be honest, quite Propeller have it now as well.
Yeah, I was going to say Propeller's the one that we're looking at using as an interim solution to our systems build.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What you were mentioning before, Dave, I think when you go into Power Apps, it's actually a module just to pull off the OCR stuff, and then you put it into a flow, and then you can pick off things like EICR. So it's almost like low code, no code, isn't it? And you can say if this. What we used it for was there was a chap that had to go through like 150 EICRs just to make sure they were filled out correctly. And what it does is it puts them through the system, and it'll spit out like 5 that he has to double check rather than having to double check all of them. And that's they've cut down hugely on time. Do you have your own DLO, Dave, or are you outsourced?
Apologies, I'm going to have to drop off. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
To answer your question, Lee, no, we have contractors, so we don't have DLO. No.
That's something that we're looking at. Is the RIT asked the question, why are you scanning in these certificates when essentially they're an output from a database already? Because surely the certificate is just the human readable format of the data in the background. So I can understand why people who don't have their own DLO and they have contractors bringing the certificates in would need to do this. But from my perspective, we're trying to flip it around and go, why are we producing certificates in the first place when all it is a human readable view of data that we've got on the back end? So, and that's just quite naturally developed over the years with anybody actually asking the reason why.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Right, well, I was going to say that thanks for that, everybody. I mean, that was really good. As I said, as per usual, we went off into an area and explored an area we never thought we'd be talking about from the beginning, which is always good. So, brilliant. All right then, guys.
We'll set up a work stream session on this, or a couple actually, probably.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
definitely.
Thanks
All right.
very
Keep in
much.
touch. Thanks,
Please, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.